hit like and subscribe. You're watching the Marc Lamont Hill official YouTube channel.
I have permission from the elders to proceed. Thank you. Mother, Father, God, we can feel your power. Yeah. Ancestors, we can feel your power. Yeah. Mother, Father, God, ancestors, spirit guides, guardian angels, all forces of love and light, we give thanks for you. We thank you for life and breath. We thank you for this moment of kinship and friendship and gathering as we celebrate the life of our beloved Assata Shakur. For every sacrifice we made, we give thanks for Assata. Yeah. I want y'all to sing this. We give thanks for Assata. For every price that she paid, we give thanks for Assata. We give thanks for Assata. Yeah. Oh, that feels so good. Woo. For every lesson that she gave, what we said? We give thanks for Assata. Yeah. And we forever say her name. Hey, what we say? We give thanks for Assata. Yeah. For our self-determination. What we say? Yeah, it felt so good. For her time spent building a nation. Whoa, what you say? For her love for black people, what you say? Now she flying like an eagle. Whoa, what you say? Yeah. Everybody take a deep breath in. Presence the life force ebbing and flowing and growing inside of you right here, right now. Know that the same light that lives in you is the same light that comes from the Most High. As it is above, so it is below. As we stand here in what some would call the worst of times and what others would call the best of times. What I know for sure is that we are right on time, Ashe. I know we was built for this, Ashe. I know that we are, in fact, the ones we've been waiting for, Ashe. And so we give thanks for earth, wind, fire, and water, the elements that exist within us and around us, Ashe. We call on you, Great Spirit. We call on you, great ancestors, and ask that you continue to guide us and protect us and order our steps, Ashe. We hold space and give thanks for the indigenous land upon which we stand. We give thanks for the Anacostans and the Piscataway, Ashe. We honor our ancient African ancestors, the first mothers and fathers of human civilization, Ashe. We give space and hold space for the great civilizations of Kemet, Kush, Nubia, Ethiopia, and Sudan, Ashe. Ghana, Mali, and Songhai, Ashe. We honor the Igbo, the Yoruba, the Hausa, Ashe. The Akan, the Wolof, the Fulani, the Dahomey, and the Dogon, Ashe. The Mande and the Kapele and the Bantu people, Ashe. We honor the African cosmologies that made their way into the Americas in many forms, including Candomblé and Santa Maria, Ashe. We honor you, creators of math, science, medicine, astronomy, language, art, music, and philosophy, Ashe. We honor you, creators of the spiritual systems, literature, architecture, agriculture, Ashe. We honor the high priests, the great kings and queens, the warriors, the magic makers, the shapeshifters, Ashe. The storytellers, Ashe. The artists, the scholars, the builders, the conceivers, the liberators. In this world where we are used to the reactors, we honor the impactors, Ashe. And we acknowledge that we too are the impactors, Ashe. We honor the healers, the medicine men and women, Ashe. And we honor the medicine inside of us, Ashe. Everybody say, I am the medicine. We are the medicine. And so we call on just but a few of the names right here and now. And as we call on these names, we are very specific, because we're not just calling on any ancestors. We calling on the light workers, the freedom fighters, the liberators, the healers, the builders and conceivers. Ashe. So we call on the spirit of Imhotep. Ashe. Call on Queen Tai. Ashe. Amenhotep III. Akhenaten. Ramses II. Queen Nzinga. Menelik II. Shaka Zulu. Toussaint Louverture. Jean-Jacques Dessalines. Queen Ya Asantewa. Nani and Kojo of the Maroons. Gandhara and Zumbi of the Quilombos. Henrietta Lacks. Sitting Bull. Sarah Winnemucca. Harriet Tubman. John Brown. Frederick Douglass. Sojourner Truth. Marcus Garvey. Haile Selassie. Kwame Nkrumah. Patrice Lumumba. Winnie Mandela. Nelson Mandela. Stephen Biko. Kwame Ture. My father, Baba Dick Gregory. Nanny Helen Burroughs. Huey P. Newton. Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. Fatima Bernawi. Ghassan Kanafani. Maurice Mpolo. Alice Badiangana. Andre Bluen. Celia Sanchez. Melba Hernandez. Michael Eugene Archer, D'Angelo. Tupac Shakur. Mutulu Shakur. El Haj Malik El Shabazz, Malcolm X. Medgar Evers. Fannie Lou Hamer. Fela Kuti. Bob Marley. Nina Simone. Toni Morrison. Nikki Giovanni. Fred Hampton. Sekou Odinga. Marilyn Buck. Fidel Castro. Che Guevara. Assata Shakur. Assata Shakur. Assata Shakur. Assata Shakur. In this sacred spaces, we call out your name. With the power of the Most High and these anointed ancestors, may their power come through us right here and right now. And may we know that with their power, with their courage and their vibration, as seen through us, that we get to live out as their wildest dreams, that we get to carry out with their wisdom, with their courage, that it becomes our own, that we become fearless in these times, that we know that we are the ones that we have been waiting for, that we know with both hands outstretched to the heavens, right here and right now, if you can outstretch your hands to the heavens, that our victory is certain, that our victory is certain. And we say, Ashe, Ashe, Ashe. Thank you.
This is Assata Shakur. This is Assata.
My name is Assata Shakur, and I was born and raised in the United States. I am a descendant of Africans who were kidnapped and brought to the Americas as slaves. I spent my early childhood in the racist segregated South. I later moved to the northern part of the country, where I realized that black people were equally victimized by racism and oppression. I grew up and became a political activist, participating in student struggles, the anti-war movement, and most of all, in the movement for the liberation of African Americans in the United States. I later joined the Black Panther Party, an organization that was targeted by the COINTELPRO program, a program that was set up by the Federal Bureau of Investigation to eliminate all political opposition to the U.S. government's policies, to destroy the black liberation movement in the United States, to discredit activists, and to eliminate potential leaders. Under the COINTELPRO program, many political activists were harassed, imprisoned, murdered, or otherwise neutralized. As a result of being targeted by COINTELPRO, I, like many other young people, was faced with the threat of prison, underground, exile, or death. The FBI, with the help of local police agencies, systematically fed false accusations and fake news articles to the press, accusing me and other activists of crimes we did not commit. Although in my case the charges were eventually dropped or I was eventually acquitted, the national and local police agencies created a situation where, based on their false accusations against me, any police officer could shoot me on sight. It was not until the Freedom of Information Act was passed in the mid-'70s that we began to see the scope of the United States government's persecution of political activists. At this point, I think that it is important to make one thing very clear. I have advocated, and I still advocate, revolutionary changes in the structure and in the principles that govern the United States. I advocate self-determination for my people and for all oppressed people inside the United States. I advocate an end to capitalist exploitation, the abolition of racist policies, the eradication of sexism, and the elimination of political repression. If that is a crime, then I am totally guilty. To make a long story short, I was captured in New Jersey in 1973 after being shot with both arms held in the air and then shot again from the back. I was left on the ground to die, and when I did not, I was taken to a local hospital where I was threatened, beaten, and tortured. In 1977, I was convicted in a trial that can only be described as a legal lynching. In 1979, I was able to escape with the aid of some of my fellow comrades. I saw this as a necessary step, not only because I was innocent of the charges against me, but because I knew that the racist legal system in the United States, I would receive no justice. I was also afraid that I would be murdered in prison. I later arrived in Cuba, where I am currently living in exile as a political refugee. The New Jersey State Police and other law enforcement officials say they want to see me brought to justice. But I would like to know what they mean by justice. Is torture justice? I was kept in solitary confinement for more than 2 years, mostly in men's prisons. Is that justice? My lawyers were threatened with imprisonment and imprisoned. Is that justice? I was tried by an all-white jury without even the pretext of impartiality and then sentenced to life in prison plus 33 years. Is that justice? Let me emphasize that justice for me is not the issue I am addressing here. It is justice for my people that is at stake. When my people receive justice, I am sure that I will receive it too. I ask nothing for myself. I only ask you to examine the social reality of the United States and to speak out against the human rights violations that are taking place. On this day, the birthday of Martin Luther King, I am reminded of all those who gave their lives for freedom. Most of the people who live on this planet are still not free. I ask only that you continue to work and pray to end oppression and political repression. It is my heartfelt belief that all the people on this earth deserve justice, social justice, political justice, and economic justice. I believe it is the only way we will ever achieve peace and prosperity on this earth. I hope that you enjoy your visit to Cuba. This is not a country that is rich in material wealth, but it is a country that is rich in human wealth, spiritual wealth, and moral wealth. Respectfully yours, Assata Shakur, Havana, Cuba.
Hear her speak. It's now my honor to bring to the stage none other than artist, activist, founder of Busboys and Poets, and the author of a new book, A Seat at the Table, and my friend, Andy Shalal. Let's give it up. And now we want to introduce Dr. Marc Lamont Hill, American academic, journalist, author, activist, professor, and so much more, and my new friend.
Thank you all for being here. When we decided to do this tribute to Assata Shakur, we didn't know how many people would want to show up, but you sure as hell showed up. So thank you. Thank you for being here. And I have to say, I don't know about you, but I was moved to the core when I heard Diana Gregory. What a beautiful, beautiful voice. You truly summoned those spirits. Thank you so much. Thank you. I received a phone call from Mark when I posted online that Assata Shakur had passed to the ancestors, and he said, "Is this for real?" And I said, "Yes, I received the message from a very reliable source." So I immediately talked to him about the idea of trying to do a tribute to Assata Shakur. And of course, I couldn't think of a better person than Marc Lamont Hill. Marc Lamont Hill is an American academic, author, activist, and media personality known for his work on race, education, and social justice. He's a host of BET News, the Griot Al Jazeera Front, and the Coffee and Book podcast. And he was named one of the most influential Black leaders by Ebony magazine a couple of years ago. I'd like to welcome you, Mark. Thank you for being here.
Thank you. Peace, everybody.
I want to ask you, first of all, before we start to speak about Assata Shakur, I know back in 2018, you were fired by CNN for speaking up on Palestine.
Yeah.
You continue to speak up on Palestine. Tell us, why is Palestine important to us then, and why is it important to us today?
Free the land. The legacy of Assata Shakur. First of all, we can feel it in here, can't we? It feels so powerful and so beautiful. And for all of us to be gathered together in this way is extraordinary. When I think of, for me, let me just say something about Assata first. Assata for me is for me, there are two people who shaped my consciousness and my understanding of the world. There's Malcolm X and there's Assata Shakur. And there are two books that changed my life and probably saved my life. It's Malcolm X and Assata Shakur. And the reason, one of the things that I learned from those books was the importance of freedom, not as an individual project, not as a solo project, but as a collective project. We're only free when we are collectively free. That's where we begin. When you read this wonderful book, Assata, you notice the first thing that struck me is that all the I's are lowercase. And if you're a writer or a publisher, you know it's hard to do. Like making them uppercases, lowercases every time is hard. But she was reinforcing a principle about individuality being outside the logic and grammar of our liberation project. It ain't about me, it's about us. Right? And that's about collective struggle, but it's also about internationalism. We talk about political solidarity a lot, and I think solidarity is important, but solidarity can just be an act of generosity. It can be just an act of affirmation. It could just be, yo, I see you over there. I'm rocking with you. I love what y'all doing. Stay strong. It could just be that. But transnationalism, or internationalism rather, is more important, right? Having a transnational analysis, but a belief in an internationalist politics is important. Because if you have an internationalist vision, you understand that our suffering isn't just connected because everybody just happens to be catching hell all over the world. It's that there's a system of oppression that binds us all together. And the nation state is a relatively new thing. The borders and the passports and the identities that we have are modern constructs. White supremacy doesn't care about what nationality you are. You know, capitalism doesn't care about what passports you carry. These networks of struggle, the settler colonial project of Israel is not disconnected from the settler colonial project of the United States. And it's not disconnected from the settler colonial project of France or of the UK. And so in order...
What's going on? Something's happening.
Okay. All right. I can live with that. First you said, I thought you meant like a snitch. I was like, I ain't turning my back to the rat.
That door needs to be kept closed.
It's all good. But
all right.
Let's refocus.
Please keep that back door closed. Don't let it open, please.
Yeah.
Make sure it stays closed. Thank you.
Locked. But family, the idea of internationalism is important. This is what Malcolm was talking about in Message to the Grassroots when he's talking about the Bandung Conference. This is what Dr. King was talking about in his later years. This is what the Panthers were talking about the entire time. This is what Assata was teaching us in the book and through her practice from the moment she left that prison to the moment she escaped to Cuba to the moment that she returned to their ancestors. And that is that we have to have a connected international struggle. And any revolutionary vision we have, any revolutionary imagination that we nurture and conjure can't be rooted in the United States only. It has to be rooted in an international, interconnected vision of oppressed people. So that takes us to Gaza. That's what the guy. I stand up for Gaza because it's the right thing to do. I stand up for Palestine because it's the right thing to do. But it's also not a hookup to Palestinians. It's also an understanding that Palestinian liberation is bound up in our liberation, but also their repression. And we got to hear this part too, y'all. Their repression is tied to our complicity. Let's not pat ourselves too hard on the back for fighting for Palestine when it's our tax dollars and the elected officials that we choose. People in this room voted for folk on both sides of the aisle that supplied weapons, money and diplomatic cover to Israel for over 100 years of apartheid. So it's our duty. It's our moral responsibility. It's our political duty. But it's also the only way we ever gonna get free. So that's why I stand with Palestine.
Beautiful.
Free Palestine.
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 Free Palestine. I have to say, this is so. This book tells the story, of course, of Assata Shakur. It's an autobiography. It's an incredible story, of course. But I want to echo what you just said on page 267. She said, "It was clear to me that without a truly internationalist component, nationalism was reactionary.
Yes.
There was nothing revolutionary about nationalism by itself. Hitler and Mussolini were nationalists. Any community seriously concerned with its own freedom has to be concerned about other people's freedom as well. The victory of oppressed people anywhere in the world is a victory for Black people. Each time one of imperialism's tentacles is cut off, we are closer to liberation. Yes. The struggle of South Africa is the most important battle of the century for Black people. The defeat of apartheid in South Africa will bring Africans all over the planet closer to liberation. Imperialism is an international system of exploitation, and we as revolutionaries need to be internationalists to defeat it." And of course, the struggle of South Africa then, the struggle for Palestine today, and the apartheid that the Palestinians are facing in Israel. So thank you so much for taking us there. Why is the story of Assata Shakur even more important today, given what's happening around us? We see people being abducted in the street, and we see also people turning away. We of course see a lot of people are stepping up and stepping forward and pushing back, but not in the numbers that we would like to see in order for this creep of fascism continues to overcome what's happening today. What can we learn from Assata, and why do you think people are feeling so sometimes defeated in this moment?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think first, to learn from the story of Assata, we have to be honest about who Assata Shakur was. We have a tendency in the West, and especially in the United States, to reshape and reimagine people in the image and likeness of our interests, our fears, and sometimes our wildest aspirations. Some of y'all wanted Obama to be something he wasn't. And as people move into the mainstream, sometimes to make them palatable, we strip from them their revolutionary DNA. We don't want to remember Martin King as the person who had a sermon in his pocket the Sunday before he passed away on April 4th of '68, why America may go to hell. They want to remember the King of '63. And even The Dream was a radical reimagination of American capitalism, a refutation of American capitalism. It was a call not for a dream, but for a promise. The whole point was he had a dream that America would one day fulfill its broken promises. But we don't want to remember that king. The king who was virtually shut out of the mainstream by '68. The king that couldn't get a speech at Morehouse College because they said he was a bad influence on young people. They said he went to jail too much. We don't want that king. we rummage through history and we dust people off and we take away the stuff that we don't like and we stand them up and we turn these radical political minds and bodies into multicultural liberal action figures. We take Malcolm, and now he's suddenly somebody who was a bad Muslim, went to Mecca, saw some white people, became a good Muslim. Right? And we ignore his critique of white supremacy, his critique of capitalism. We remember You've Been Hoodwinked, Bamboozled, which is a freestyle from Denzel. Love Denzel. But we ignore the letter he wrote in September of 1964 on Zionist logic. And I'm watching as the world resurrects Assata, because I was so happy during the Ferguson uprisings and during the Black Lives Matter movements and the George Floyd uprisings, when America was coming to terms, having its racial reckoning, whatever that meant, that we started to resurrect Baldwin. Baldwin made an internet resurrection, and Assata was being championed in the streets, and we were saying her name and we were repeating her chants, but I watched slowly her message get stripped away. Assata was rooted in anti-capitalist praxis. Assata wasn't trying to massage capitalism. She wasn't trying to rebuild capitalism. She wasn't trying to play with capitalism. She wasn't trying to lean forward. She was saying that the capitalist system is inherently dehumanizing and that no liberation project can prevail, that no type of human existence can thrive and sustain itself if we live in a world that is organized around the logic of a class-defending state. We cannot have a capitalist society, but we try to push that part aside. I'm watching when she, after she passed away, people claiming her as a feminist. Now, to be clear, there is no radical vision of abolition, of anti-capitalism, of human prosperity that doesn't have a vision, a feminist vision underneath it. There is no principled struggle that isn't anchored in feminism. I want to be clear about that. But when they call her feminist, that's not what they're trying to do. They're trying to co-opt her into liberal feminism and neoliberal feminism that suggests that the women's liberation is bound up in having access to capital and having it all and being Sheryl Sandberg or Hillary Clinton rather than Harriet Tubman or Angela Davis. So I'm watching that. So I say all that to say, her story is valuable, but we got to look for the real Assata, not the one that's going to pop up on Lifetime or BET or some other net or Tyler Perry's version in 5 years. I know, right? I just hope he don't play Assata. That's all I'm saying.
Assata at Mama's house.
Right, right. Assata reminds us of what principled struggle looks like. Assata reminds us of what collective liberation looks like. I was so happy, and every time I see my dear sister Yana, I cry. We gotta go meet for coffee or something. Every time I see her, I end up crying because she does these wonderful intros and she invokes the ancestors. And when we say the name Sekou Odinga, who was my mentor, my elder, we can't talk about Assata Shakur without talking about Sekou Odinga and the Black Liberation Army and the Weathermen Underground and every other person who liberated her. We can't celebrate her escaping to Cuba and ignore the fact that Sekou Odinga broke into that prison, walked her out by the hand, and sat in her place for 30 years. That is what revolutionary love looks like. That's what revolutionary sacrifice looks like. That's what revolutionary struggle looks like. That's the lesson. That's the lesson. What are we willing to sacrifice for this? What are we willing to give up for this? Who are we willing to struggle for? That to me is the lesson. It's them lowercase I's. You know what I'm saying? Y'all with me? It's them lowercase I's. The lowercase I's is why Sekou was able, and others were able to help liberate her. Other names we don't say. I say his name because he came home. We talk about it. May he rest in peace. When I see or hear the story of Assata, I'm reminded that as African people, we can do anything. They locked her in a men's prison. They caged her. And yet Kikuya was born, her beloved daughter. They allowed nothing for her. And yet she and Kamau were able to produce life in a death camp. They were able to produce love and possibility in a world that tries to strip you of all humanity. They made something out of nothing. That's what it means to be Black in America. She's a reminder of that, of what's possible. She's a reminder, Assata story is a reminder of the radical, can I steal this for 1 second? Of the radical imagination. I told my wife I don't need glasses, so this didn't happen. She might watch the stream. Nope. All right, just 1 second. Oh my God, it's so much better. My grandmother came all the way from North Carolina. She came to tell me about her dream. My grandmother had been dreaming all of her life, and the dreams have come true. My grandmother dreams of people passing and babies being born and people being free, but it is never specific. Red birds sitting on fences, rainbows at sunset, conversations with people long gone. My grandmother's dreams have always come when they were needed, and they have always meant what we needed them to mean. She dreamed my mother would be a school teacher. My aunt would go to law school. And during the hard times, she dreamed the good times were coming. She told us what we needed to be told and made us believe. She made us believe it like nobody else could have. She did her part. The next was up to us. We had to make it real. Dreams and reality are opposites. Action synthesizes it. So her grandmother told her at the prison that she'd be free. We'll return to her freedom, but Assata is a reminder of what happens when we dream the most radical and ambitious freedom dreams possible. The evidence is against us. The evidence is always against our liberation. The evidence was against the end of slavery in the United States. The evidence was against marriage equality. The evidence was against against abolition. The evidence is against all the things that we dream of, and yet our ancestors dreamed those dreams anyway. And sometimes our grandmamas and great-grandmamas dreamed of forms of liberation that they would never experience. Can you imagine dreaming of liberation that you would not see, but you still fight and sacrifice and bleed and cry and pray and bleed and cry and pray and die for a freedom that your children or your children's children might one day appreciate? That is what it means to be Black and engaging in a radical imagination. But dreaming ain't enough. She said it's the action that synthesizes. We can't just dream of freedom. We got to struggle together. We got to organize together. We got to build together. Assata's story is a reminder that if we dream the dream, it is possible. And then the action comes, and then suddenly the impossible becomes possible, and the possible becomes inevitable, but only through our struggle. And that's why I love the beauty of this book, because it's also a reminder of the power of the children. If you remember the book, if y'all haven't read it, please read it. Her daughter, who's born, is in that prison visiting her mama. And she thinks her mom can leave and just don't want to. She said, "Mama, you can leave if you wanted to, you just don't want to." And she's pushing against the bars, and she's pushing until her little body tuckers out and falls. That's when she said, "I knew it was time to be free." If you read Mumia Abu Jamal, my dear brothers, alive from death row, when he talks about his grandchildren, or he talks about what it meant for his babies to be in that prison and push against that prison wall, and to also realize at some point that they couldn't get out. The children are a reminder of what we're sacrificing for, of why we're willing to put our lives on the line, why we're willing to engage in that ethic of risk, of why we're willing to die for the world that is not yet. And so the last thing I say, the thing that moves me about this book is after she did all that talking and she knew she had to be free in the rumination and the thinking and the talking with her mother and her grandma, she did all of that. And she knew she had to get free. And then there's that beautiful poem tradition. And then the next word is the postscript. It just says freedom. It just says freedom. It's now 1984 and she's in Cuba. She's in the Palenque. She's in the maroon camp. She doesn't say how she got there. She didn't say why she got there. But she's free. And from 1984, even before, from the escape to 1984, until she returned to the ancestors, our enemies, the captors, the slave masters, the modern plantation owners, the pigs, the imperialists, the conquistadors, none of them could capture her. She lived free and she died free. And that is a lesson to all of us about what is possible. The dream is freedom. Long live Cuba. And so, man, I read this book every year since the first time I read it. And her story doesn't stop at this book. When we think about Assata's work after that, her letter to the Pope, which we got to hear, her work with Black August, helping another group of radical activists and organizers and cultural workers to understand freedom. That beautiful song by Common happens, a song for Assata happens because they're there, right? People like Matulu, M1, Dead Prez, Dream Hampton. We can name so many folk, Monifa Bandele, Lumumba Bandele, Malcolm X grassroots movement, a whole cadre of brilliant, amazing, wonderful people learned at her feet because she understood that it wasn't enough for her to just get free, but that it was important for her to ensure that the next generation enjoyed levels of freedom that she couldn't experience, but that would lead to our collective liberation.
Beautiful. She writes in there in her postscript that Cuba represented hope. That for her, that was the moment where she was able to be her full self. She experienced the racism that was experienced in the United States was very different than what was happening in Cuba. Yeah. Cuba was on its way to correct the injustice that has happened over decades and centuries. The United States still, till today, has failed to do so. Can you talk a little bit about what does Cuba mean to us here in the United States, and particularly to Black Americans?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I want to add some caveats to this, but I think for so long, Cuba and other places, we could look at Algeria at particular moments. We could look at different spaces at different moments throughout the diaspora, and realize that Cuba represented the possibility of liberation. It represented the possibility of a protracted and sustained struggle against imperialism. When Fulgencio Batista is overthrown by Fidel Che and others, it was a moment of extraordinary. It was part of a bigger moment of hope, right? When we talk about Cuba in particular, it was the idea that say that the imperialists could be defeated, that the West could be defeated, and that it was not enough to be bigger. It wasn't enough to have the most weapons. It wasn't enough to have the most money. And even in The Godfather 2, there's a moment where Michael is driving with Hyman Roth, and they're in Cuba. Like, that night where he's Fredo, you broke my heart. That night is the night of the Cuban Revolution, and he says he was sort of saying that these people are risking it all with very little. And he said, what does that make you think? He said, it makes me think they can win. And so the Cuban Revolution is the possibility of David defeating Goliath. It's the possibility of victory, but not just momentary victory, but sustained victory. When my sister screams, venceremos, hasta la victoria siempre. Venceremos is not just a moment. It's a slogan of the Cuban Revolution, until victory always. The revolution was an ongoing project of it's not perfect, but it gets perfected. It's ongoing struggle, ongoing remaking, ongoing reshaping, ongoing practices to figure out how we can be more democratic, how we can be more safe, how we can be more humane. The Cuban Revolution represented the possibility, and the fact that they would receive Assata and protect Assata and refuse to extradite Assata, despite the fact that the United States was exacting extraordinary pressure on them. And remember, this is 1984. So you're also about to enter the special period, right? You're about to enter that moment in Cuba after the fall of the Soviet Union, where Cuba doesn't have the kind of resources or support of an empire, of a hegemon. And so Cuba's doing this at great risk and great peril. And they continue to protect Assata. Now, I don't want to romanticize Cuba. I'd spend a decent amount of time talking to Afro-Cubans who talk about anti-Blackness, who talk about racism, who talk about different things that we have to be honest about. And it doesn't make you a gusano because you have a critique. But we also don't want to hold Cuba to a standard that the United States hasn't been able to meet with a 300-year head start. You know what I'm saying? So Cuba's a work in progress. Let's have we can have that dialogue. I don't want to shut you down. The audience can't hear you. I can hear you, and I value what you're saying, but the audience can't hear you, and so it's going to. We're going to have a community involvement part. I want you to speak first, and let's talk. I want to hear you, and let's build sincerely. For me, it's less about what Cuba is. If I understood your question, is what Cuba symbolizes. And so for me, Cuba symbolizes possibility. But it's not just Cuba. If we look in the 1950s, there were numerous revolutions happening. And oppressed people were pushing back. The colonized were fighting the colonizer. And it wasn't, as Adolf Getachew, the great political theorist, talks about, it wasn't nation building. The goal of these people wasn't to build a new nation or to give the gun to the rabbit. It was world making, not nation building, but world making. The idea that we could craft a new vision of the global arrangement that didn't hinge upon imperial power and domination and oppressed people and violated minorities, etc. Now, obviously, that didn't work out so great. The world is still messed up in lots of ways. I don't want to romanticize the global landscape or the work of even of those of us in the global South and those of us allied with the global South. But those are symbols of what's possible. And Assata stood as a symbol of what's possible. And she looked to what was possible. And I think that was why places like Algeria was so important even to the Panthers. Yeah.
We do regular trips to Cuba. Yes. We do regular trips to Cuba through Busboys and Poets, where we go and visit the education system, the healthcare system, all of the things that I think we like to think that we are better at in this country.
Yeah.
But we realize that we really are far behind in so many ways. The fact that they have universal health care, the fact that if you're a tourist and you get sick, you get taken care of. And the bill is very, very small. We were in Cuba, my wife got ill, and she was taken to the hospital, and they wanted to keep her overnight, and they gave her a full physical, blood test, everything else, and mind you, this is recent, when Cuba is under a huge blockade that's keeping them from even getting Band-Aids in. But she was given the best health care. They send her back to the hotel, and they had a nurse at the hotel connect with the hospital so they can check on her every hour to make sure she's okay. Imagine that. The entire bill was $140. $140 will be paid. And this is the kind of, I think, things that we as Americans believe is impossible because we've been sold this bill of goods that it is impossible to have this kind of opportunity. It is impossible to have universal health care. It is impossible to have universal education. It is impossible to have child care for free. It is impossible to have buses for free so people can go around without having to spend half their salaries just to get by from one section of town to the other. All these things are impossible, being sold all that good. But damn it, you start a war and the money shows up. Billions upon billions upon billions of dollars shows up. And that's the part that always baffles me. How is it that we've been sold this bill of goods, that we keep believing over and over and over again, these lies that we're told that we cannot do this? And we have to really become a little bit more aggressive in our approach to our government to say, yes, we can, instead of continuing to buy the bullshit, frankly, that we are constantly sold. Even the poorest countries in the world have universal health care because they understand that health care is a human right. It is not an industry. It is not a business. It should be a human right, just like education should be a human right, just like all the other things that we appreciate as human beings just to exist. Clean water should be a human right. These are the things that I think sometimes just blows your mind. You're living in the richest country in the world. And you know, the part that also makes me crazy is that dental care is considered like a luxury. Like for whatever reason, you can have health care, but dental care is a whole different story. You know, and what they'll do, if you need a crown for your tooth, it's like $6,000. And the insurance, the best insurance, may pay even half of that. Now you have to come up with $3,000 in order to one goddamn tooth, and you have 32 teeth. That's a lot of money, you know. So I think it's 32 teeth, but I'm not sure. But anyway, I think we buy into these things and think that they're normal, but they're not. This is not normal, and we really have to stand up. We have just given Israel $21 billion. $21 billion. That's on top of what we normally give them every single year, which is about $4 billion. And for what? To create havoc, destroy, maim. And you know something else? And I'm sorry to keep going on this, but...
Go, please.
Yep. The United States is supposed to be receiving some children who have been amputated by the bombs and all of that. They've had their legs removed, they've had their arms removed, they've had their eyes removed, and they're supposed to send them somewhere to be able to be healed. The United States was accepting them. They stopped accepting them. When Marco Rubio came on, he says, no more of these kids did come in. And you know why? Because it gives really bad optics at the airports when people meet them and see what our dollars, our tax dollars have done to these people. So he says no more. So they don't accept any more children who have been maimed and destroyed and wreaked havoc upon by our tax dollars, but they refuse to accept them in this country. Shame on us. Shame on us. So anyway, I want to have maybe, do you have time for a couple? How are we doing on time?
We good.
How are we doing on time? Maybe we can have a couple people ask some questions, if that's all right.
We have one question over here.
Hi, I'm Dr. Goburn. Thank you to everybody who's here, and thank you for taking my comments. I wasn't trying to disrespect her or anything like that.
Yeah.
And so, I mean, I've read her books. I read a lot of books. And I do agree that Assata was for the liberation of people. and against
Put the microphone close to your mouth.
against the structure that we're dealing with, right? But the reason why I interjected is because Cuba, I struggle with her because she's for the freedom of people, but she lived in a communist country. I have family members, Ibae, those who have passed away and those who are alive, who are from Cuba. My godparents could not return to Cuba. And so I encourage people to really learn the history. The revolution started out for liberation, to free the people, but that's not how it ended up. And so I think people have, so that's why I struggle with Assata, because it's like, yeah, you preach this, or she did preach this, but the people around you, in Cuba, the food is rationed. People cannot grow gardens. In the summertime, they either have to go get education or they have to work in the fields. And those are real things that happen in Cuba. It's a communist country.
Let's be careful not to trade in falsities. Just to make sure, I think it's important to travel to Cuba and learn for yourselves what Cuba is all about. And like Mark mentioned, Cuba is hardly perfect. It is far from perfect, and there's a lot of work that needs to be done to improve the situation there for the people, and they'll tell you that. But we need to be able to be a little bit more open-minded about this.
Yeah, I'm always fascinated when we drop the communist word like it's the communist country. This is a capitalist country, and when I think about the victims, like Malcolm talked about the victims of American democracy. If you look at the victims of American capitalism or Western capitalism, we see far more inequality, injustice. I mean, this country is organized around racial capitalism. And as a result, we end up with slavery. We end up with millions of people incarcerated. We end up with land stolen and extracted. We end up with these huge gaps between those who have and those who don't that can't be resolved. It's not just that we're tinkering and we're going to get to it. Capitalism depends upon these types of antagonisms and these types of contradictions. I agree with the sister. Cuba is not perfect, but I don't want to just say it's not perfect. There are fundamental challenges to some of the social arrangements. I agree. I'm not a scholar of Cuba, so I don't want to overstate this. But what I will say is, based on everything I've read, everything I've seen, and everyone I know who spends a great deal of time there, for sure. I'm saying there are people who know more than me, and in the world of podcasts, every black man with a microphone thinks they're an expert, and I don't want to be that person. So I'm saying I don't know enough about Cuba to passionately defend this argument, but what I do know is that some of the things that we see as collective shortcomings are only shortcomings when we think about it through the lens of American capitalism, which frames us to think that I should be able to accumulate as much stuff as I can for myself with no restrictions and with no eye toward what someone else may want or need. And so so that's, I'm just saying, I think some of the critiques are valid, but I think we also have to be honest about sort of what lens we're looking through. And that's not at my sister over there. It's just in general in terms of how we critique Cuba or any place else.
Yeah. All right. We have time maybe for two more comments or questions, please. I don't know yep. If you want to take it. Yep. All right. Yep.
Hi. My main question is just like currently in this current day, what advice y'all have towards protecting and respecting Black women, like Sister Assata, in a current time where, oh, sorry about that. I know how to, okay.
Can you ask that again?
My bad. Huh?
Can you ask that question again?
Yeah, I can do it. Just in general, how we respect and protect Black women when things like critical race theory is under attack, intersectionality is under attack, and just like making sure that we are centering not only our experiences as Black women, and I mean women with an X, like of all like femme-leaning identities, but also just pushing towards that message. I would love to hear y'all's perspective.
Well, it's a great question. I want to start from a place of Assata's analysis, because I think intersectionality is important. But I think it's also important not to equate all forms of identity as operating on the same tier. In other words, as someone who's critical of capitalism, as someone who is in a Marxist tradition, Assata is arguing at some level that, yes, patriarchy exists and we need to deal with it. And yes, transphobia exists, we need to deal with it. Homophobia exists, we need to deal with it, etc. But classism isn't another ism that exists along that spectrum, but rather it's the class antagonism that creates the conditions for all these other contradictions to happen, and that's her position. So at least we can have different stances on that, but at the very least, if we're talking about in Assata's tradition, we got to be clear about what Assata is saying. That's part of why I say the people who are trying to co-opt her into particular strands of feminist theory, and Assata's not anti-feminist by any stretch, but I think it's important to understand her theoretical apparatus that she's operating from, both in this book and also in her subsequent writing and speeches over the last 2 decades. So to protect, from Assata's tradition, I believe, to protect Black women, and when I say Black women, I mean Black women, Black girls, Black femmes, I mean cis, I mean trans, I'm talking about the full gamut. To do that, we have to be willing first to understand the material conditions that have been created. And those material conditions exist in the context of the capitalist mode of production. So I think we have to resolve that contradiction. That's it. But let me be a little less abstract and more on the ground for a second. When you read this book, Assata talks about sexual violence. You know, and there's this moment where she talks about the violence that happened to her, and I don't want to get too graphic because I don't want to trigger anybody and I don't know who's in the room. But what I'll say is when she talks about this, one of the lines that stuck with me from the very first time I read the book was, they assaulted me. I'm paraphrasing. They assaulted me. She said, I know why I hated them. They assaulted me. She said, what I could never understand is why they hated me so much. That's a fundamental thing we got to work through. In our movements, in our organizing, in our families, in our communities. How do we get at misogyny? How do we get at patriarchy? How do we get at sexism? How do we get at these systems and structures that dehumanize women? How do we get at rape culture? How do we navigate this stuff? Right. I think that protecting Black women begins with having the critique or the recognition that we're doing that. Perhaps we shouldn't be so nostalgic for the good old days, right? Because in the same way that Trump's America was great again is a false narrative, the idea that the Black family in the 50s and 60s was perfect, say that to the victims of domestic abuse, say that to the victims of sexual violence, say that to the victim, right? All these things are happening. I'm not saying that everything was awful. I'm saying that we have to be honest about who we are and what we're not and where we need to be. Black people are not pathological. Black people are not any different than anybody else who comes up in this wicked country. But what we have to do is unlearn some of the things that we learned in this space. And we have to unlearn some of the practices and traditions that precede this space. I think we got to be honest about that. I think we have to, in the context of movements, we have to prioritize women leadership. I think we have to prioritize women voices. I think that our political education, when you read Assata's biography, when you read Angela Davis's biography, when you read Elaine Brown, Black women have been writing and thinking and talking and telling us about our movements for decades. For as long as there's been a movement, there's been a Black woman saying, look, you're harming me. But it hasn't stopped Black women from standing with us, right? And so, but at some point, we can't just keep saying, yo, y'all dope. We have to reimagine what's possible for how we engage one another so that we can move with an ethic of love and cooperation and healing and growth. And I'm not sure that we're there because I'm not sure we're doing the political education necessary to get us there. Right. And that's it.
Okay, maybe, I don't know.
We have one more question in the back here.
Okay.
If we could, and so go ahead, brother.
All right, can we do this? Who had their hand up?
It's me over here.
Okay. I feel bad. Can we take 2 more? I promise I'll answer fast. Yeah, we'll do a lightning round.
Maybe do 3 questions. Maybe do 3 questions, and then we'll do the lightning round.
Yeah.
Yep.
Okay.
3 questions.
There's too many people here for us to take one. I feel bad. Let's do it.
I'll try to be quick with it. This might be a loaded question, but I just want to hear your thoughts about this. How do you think we, as academics and Black revolutionaries, how do you think we can bring our politic and these conversations and these spaces into Black popular culture? Because I feel like there's a disconnect right now between like what's going on here and the conversations that are being had amongst the rest. I don't want to say the rest. Yeah, I don't want to say the rest, but you know,
the unwashed masses.
God forbid, right? Because I
That's how
can't
you
say
say
that.
it.
I can't say that. But just I would like to see this. I would like to see most Black people in spaces like this. I would like to see this be how we organize, the norm. Exactly. I would not like this to be separate spaces. I want this to be how we organize. So, do you have any ideas, or just what do you think about that, basically?
All right, that's one. Let's go to the next two, and make it please short so we can get going, because we have a full program of other people to speak as well.
Okay, we have one more back here after you answer, Mark, and then I'll come to you, brother, over there.
First of all, thank you so much for taking the time out of your day to come and speak with us and pay tribute to Assata Shakur. I want to establish that. My question is also a pop culture related question, because a lot of my research focuses on how pop culture can be weaponized against Black liberation movements. So my question is, in what ways do you think are the most effective in combating the pop cultural landscape in the U.S., which includes the U.S. military entertainment complex, Hollywood, and things of that nature as well?
Yeah.
All right.
That's a great question.
I think the sister here wants to ask a question, so I'm going to give her the microphone if you don't mind, really quick.
My name is Emma Ward, and I'm one of the many people who represent the seniors here in Washington, D.C. I would like to know from you all, what can you do to help us teach children? We are not allowed to teach Black history in the school system anymore. There's no way I could take that book into the school without being fired. So what I'd like to know from you all is, how can we educate our children, because they don't know Black history?
Yeah, I think.
Okay, so we got some questions about the academics.
Yeah, they kind of all overlap and dovetail. I mean, I'm going to start with yours. And we've been saying it in our movements for decades, but it never stops being true. Like, no, it is foolish to expect your oppressor to educate you. Like, no people has gotten free through the educational institutions of their oppressors. I mean, it would be foolish. And so I think I agree that it's hard, it's impossible to do that in mainstream school, but that's why we create other institutions. That's right. That's why we create institutions. That's why we have bookstores. That's why we have Busboys and Poets. In Philadelphia, I opened Uncle Bobby's for the same reason. We have Sankofa on the other side. You have scholars like Dr. Greg Carr, who's going to... That's right, Temple University Black Studies over at HU right now. And what's he going to do? He's saying we got to jailbreak the university. So he's still in the space teaching Black folk and loving Black folk, but he's also out in the world, online, in other spaces, educating. We have to teach our children what school doesn't. That has to be our commitment. And again, it has to be a collective commitment. It's not enough for me to teach my son or my daughters what they need to know. I got to do that for all of us. And we have to have some conversations about what those lessons are, and what liberation looks like, and how we can have an educational project that gets us to liberation. And pop culture, unfortunately or fortunately, becomes the primary mechanism, the primary sort of lens through which many of us view the world. That's where we come to learn what's true, what's not. And when I say pop culture, I'm not just talking about TV. I'm talking about, think about the dolls you used to play with. Think about the games y'all used to play. You know, I'm in my 40s. Y'all played Cowboys and Indians? Who was the good guy? Who was the bad guy? How does that reinforce and normalize settler colonialism when the Cowboys are the good ones and the Indians are the bad ones? Right? Think about when we would play That's My Car in the street. If y'all ever drive a car, That's My Car. Y'all ever play that? But it fuels capitalist desire. Right? When we look at the video games Or you watch, or you watch football, all the militarism involved in football and normalizing militaristic language, from the army being sponsoring it to the sport itself. You know, I'm in the trenches and I'm doing a blitz and I'm throwing long bombs and all of it is militarism. And some of our modern religious traditions are beginning to co-opt prosperity gospels in such a way that we normalize capitalist logic rather than faith. And so if in all these spaces this is happening, it's no surprise we're becoming who we are. So the answer, I think, is for us who think we know better to intervene in those spaces. It's for us to also engage in what we call critical media literacy. That means watch TV with your kids. Watch or read a book with your kids and say, see what they're doing right there. See what's happening right there. You peep how they say. It's not enough to say, oh, that's wrong, turn it off. You have to walk them through to understand how power is operating in these spaces and to give them an alternative vision of the world. But that means academics, y'all got to be willing to not be at Harvard. Because I be on these campuses and I meet people that want to teach at the Ivies. I meet people that want to work at Goldman Sachs, the investment bank. Everybody want to go to heaven, don't nobody want to die. If you want to be free, you got to make a sacrifice. And it means you can't be in the elite spaces, because you can convince yourself, I'm in it, but I'm not. You can't. That ain't how it works. At some point, you got to make the commitment to operating with the people. And if you don't, then there's a good chance you're not on the right side of this issue. And so that means figuring out what those spaces are, what they look like, and actually fighting for them.
We have one last question. Andy, we have one last question. I was instructed by your team, and then we got to move on to the rest of the program.
Okay. Hey, yo, peace, Brother Mark. Thank you for coming down and speaking with us. Tomorrow's the 30th anniversary of the Million Man March happening at Union Temple, so I suggest everybody come out to support. My question, I sought to be brief. So Ron Walters in Pan-Africanism in the Diaspora said that democratic communalism will be a way that Black people could interact with each other in such a way that we support ourselves and our needs in order to move ourselves forward and then interact capitalistically with the environment. I don't know if you're familiar with it and whatever, but you did mention Palenques, which is a type of maroon colony. In what way do you see African people or Black people implementing systems of self-support in order to empower their community and then also empower their position within the greater society? What would be some on-the-ground, fundamental, actual ways, actual strategies that people of color, African people, can implement to improve their lives, their family lives, community lives, so on and so forth?
Yeah. I spent a lot of time thinking about abolition. And part of the question of abolition and the project of abolition, you know, this idea of creating a world without policing and prisons. And to get to abolition, you have to begin with a question of, again, through the radical imagination, what would the world look like if all of your needs were met? I mean, could y'all just think about that? Not maybe right now or maybe now, but maybe also on the way home or tomorrow while you're writing and thinking and trying. What would the world look like if all of our needs were met? Not our wants, but if all of our needs were met. So to answer your question, what I think about through the lens of abolition, but also through these other spaces, is how to construct networks of interconnectivity that allow us to meet each other's needs. So at a moment where there's gross food insecurity, what would it look like for us to build community gardens? What would it mean for us to have co-ops where workers share in the profits? What would it mean to create institutions so that we can feed each other and not wait for the state to feed us? My mother was born in Farmville, Virginia in 1939. And after Brown v. Board of Education, they closed Moton High School. They said we would rather not have school than to integrate. So many of my uncles didn't get to finish high school. They didn't get to go to school because they closed down the school. And white people had private co-ops where they educated their children. Now, as evil an act as that is, to shut children out of education, what would it mean for us to create educational co-ops? Not to shut other people out, but for us to educate ourselves. It's possible. I'll give you one more example. We know what works when it comes to decarceration, at least, right? And excarceration. If we want to shut down the prison, there's a few ways to do it. Some are structural, but there's also this thing of how do we stop feeding the prison, right? The biggest prison choice, the reason there are prisons is because we live in a society that needs to exploit and extract black labor. Let me be clear about that. This is not a behavior way out of the carceral state argument. But what I am saying is, we know that people are less likely to drop out and less likely to get incarcerated if they have mentors and big brother programs and education and arts programs and music programs. What would it mean for us to invest in those things for the purpose of keeping our children out of the reach of the carceral state? These are things that we can do. We can build institutions. We know that conflict resolution, violence interruption works. So instead of having to call the police, who aren't trained to de-escalate, what would it mean for us to call our own social workers, our own therapists into the space who are trained to resolve conflict? How do we do that? Well, we have to organize. In this room, there are enough people to do that. In this room right now, there are enough people that can go and read to kids in elementary schools. There's enough people who can do violence interruption, enough who can do conflict resolution. We have the talent. We have the resources. The problem is we keep being taught uppercase I. Let's return to the lowercase I. Forget Descartes, forget I think, therefore I am, cargato ergo sum, and think the Ubuntu. I am because we are. That's how we get there.
Ubuntu. Thank you so much, Mark. Marc Lamont Hill, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you.
And Andy Shalom.
We have a full program still going on, so please stick around for a few more minutes. I'm going to turn it over to Katia Stitt. Thank you.
Thank you. Powerful evening. Are you ready for more? I don't know. That's weak. Are you ready for more? Thank you. That's what we're talking about. And thank you, Mark and Andy. We're going to move very quickly now. We're going to have a sonic break, if you will, and invite our sister Ayana Gregory back to the stage. And I'm just gonna take a moment because I don't want to take time up with speaking. I'm gonna run through the rest of the program so you know what is next. And I'm asking every speaker when they come up to again say their name as well. But following